Fala galera, eu sou Igor Miranda e agora o papo é com Doug Aldrich, guitarrista do Dead Daisies. Essa foi a segunda vez que eu pude entrevistar o cara e de novo foi uma conversa bem legal. A gente falou bastante sobre o Radiance, que é o novo álbum desse supergrupo aí, completo por Glenn Hughes, Brian Tichy e David Lowy. Também falamos bastante sobre as passagens anteriores do Doug pelo Whitesnake e pelo Dio, a banda do saudoso vocalista Ronnie James Dio. Ele contou histórias bem legais também sobre esse passado, sobre esse período aí que ele passou com essas duas bandas. Enfim, o papo tá bem da hora, espero que você goste. Se liga!
How do you feel right now that the album was finally released and enjoyed all around the world?
It feels good. We put a lot of effort into it. It started off, we were working on songs in 2020, and then we kind of put it down for a bit because we were touring. And then our tour that was supposed to be in Europe for February got pushed back. So we decided, hey, let's go in and make a record, and we already had a start. So it was a pretty good start. And then we just added songs to it.
Yeah. I was reading some of your recent interviews, and you have been using the expression heavy grooves. I love this expression, but well, the grooves are in the spotlight, especially after Glenn Hughes joined the band. But in fact, Radiance sounds heavier, so heavy grooves, of course. How was the work around the sounds of this album? Did you guys plan to sound heavier this time, or did it come naturally?
I think it was just we didn't plan it. It just naturally came. There was a couple of riffs. Glenn had a couple of riffs. I had a couple of riffs that just seemed a little simpler. And then I think when Ben started producing, and we did it in Los Angeles, so it was in his studios, and it just got heavier. I don't know. And well, one thing that happened for sure was during the process of making demos, I found I put a Sansamp plugin on Glenn's bass, and it kind of gave it this kind of like a distorted tube amp, and he really liked it, and it sounded good with the guitars. It carried its own weight, it made it a little more aggressive, and I think maybe that too, along with Ben making the guitars heavier. A lot of times I would just play, I would just come in and play through whatever amp, Marshall or something, whatever he had set up. And it was more him like deciding the sound, I'd go, hey, I love that. Or could we do something a little more, different here on this part? But all in all, he had control of the sound.
Yeah.
Ben Gross.
But talking about the almost planet side of it, I read another interview that you guys are actually talking about doing a concept album. I don't know if I read it right, but I guess
yes.
Glenn started thinking about lyrics and ideas, but of course you guys didn't release a concept album. Do you remember if anything was discussed regarding the concept? How would this album be?
Yeah, it was still kind of in formation at that time, and I think Glenn had an idea of what he wanted it to be, that it was about a journey, that about a guy going through a journey in his life and having obstacles but overcoming them. And it's kind of like, his lyrics are anyways. They're very spiritual, but there was a definite storyline and some obstacles. And so when we decided to make this record, Radiance, we kind of felt like, nah, it's not the right timing for a concept album. It was during COVID. We thought maybe, depending on how long this thing goes on, it might be something really interesting. But in the end, only about half of those songs seemed to fit with we wanted to make another kick-ass rockin' record. And so some of the songs were a little more mellow, and we focused not away from those, but we just naturally kind of kept writing, and some other things came up that we were excited about, like Courageous and Shine On, and those were some new songs that we came up with.
Yeah. Since you mentioned the pandemic, well, you guys worked on Radiance during the pandemic since you were not able to tour after releasing the Holy Ground album. And this is an album with many positive messages in the lyrics. And musically, it was done right after Holy Ground without a tour in between. So many ideas were not born on the road. How do you believe the pandemic influenced the final result of this album?
Well, I'll tell you, we did tour a little bit in the U.S. and we did 2 runs in the U.S. last year in support of Holy Ground, and then we went to England at the end of last year, and we did some of the song riffs, like I mentioned, "Shine On." That was a riff that David was playing on the back of the bus in the U.S. And so a lot of times in that situation, I'll just grab my phone and just hit record. He doesn't even know I'm doing it. You know, he'll just be messing around, and I'll go, "Oh, that's pretty cool." Or Glenn, or if I have something, I'll put it on my phone. And then when we get into, open up the floodgates of songwriting, composing, I go back through the phone and listen to those ideas and go, "Oh, I forgot about that." So we did grab a couple of things during the road. But to answer your question, the pandemic didn't affect the recording too much, except for the fact that we probably wouldn't have done Radiance. We probably would have been on the road, and now we would have been off the road. Maybe we'd be working on Radiance now. And we kind of had a time limit because our tour got pushed back till June, I guess, from February. And so we had those months, but it took a little bit more time to record Radiance because we couldn't travel. We recorded it in Los Angeles. So we'd commute every day to the studio, and it would take a little more time to get to the studio, and then we wouldn't work as late of hours as normal because of traffic and stuff. So it took a little longer, and we had to rush a little bit. So all in all, I mean, COVID affected us the same as everybody. It's basically, you make plans and then they get screwed up,
Absolutely. Well, and for this album, you had the return of Brian Tichy, who, in addition of being a great drummer, he's also a very good guitarist. What is it like working with Brian in that regard, especially in studio, a drummer who is also a guitar player?
Well, in the studio, he's answering the second part first. Brian is really cool with, like, when he would come in and he would want to hear what I was doing, and he'd make suggestions like, "Oh, hey man, that was really cool. What if you go further with that idea?" Or like, I would say, like, "What do you think about this for the solo thing?" Like, and I could just, when he was listening to it, I could almost know what he was going to say, and then I go, hold on, I know what you're going to say. Let me try something. And it was just like we kind of have a telepathy because of that that he plays guitar and he knows my style. He knows what I can do and what I can't do, and he's got great ideas, too. But regarding the drumming, I mean, Brian just brings the whole thing to another level. I mean, he's my favorite drummer I've ever worked with. I mean, there's been amazing drummers from Carmine Appice to Simon Phillips to, Jason Bonham I've worked with. I did a session with a ton of drummers, Ainsley Dunbar, Mickey D, all these guys, and Brian Tichy is pound for pound the best drummer I've ever worked with. I mean, very musical, and the way he plays, it looks like he's playing really, really hard, but he just looks that way. He's playing with finesse. He's got a ton of groove and a ton of finesse, and so we'd go in the studio together. We'd listen to the song on the demo, and then we'd go in the studio and start playing through it. And Brian would be like, "What are you guys hearing?" Like, because obviously the demo was just a drum machine, somebody going boom, bop, whatever. He would start to go, "What about 8 notes on the hi-hat?" And then he goes, I could open it up hi-hat a little bit, give it a little more, you know, or if you want to go really heavy, let's go quarter notes with the open hi-hat. And it was like immediately there were all these ideas going, and it would be, all of a sudden it would start to feel right. And most drummers don't go that, I don't know, man. They kind of come in and go, this is what I feel like, this is what I want. And it's like, okay, cool. Most of the time that's cool, but there are times when it's nice when the drummer goes, what yeah, and you can say to Brian, like, could we try just going a little more busy on the kick drum or a little simpler on the kick drum? And he can do it where some drummers can't do that on the fly. So he really brings a lot musically and rhythmically.
Yeah. And besides David Lowy, you are the longest serving musician in the Dead Daisies, playing with different lineups. Considering that the many lineups changes over the years, what made you stay with this band?
You know, I've been friends with all of these players you know, for my entire career, starting with, well, I only met Brian once he got into I met Brian a couple of times, but once he got into Whitesnake, then we had a really good friendship started. But I like John Corabi. I've known since I was a kid, and me and Dean Castronova had a long past, and Marco and I have a long past with Whitesnake back in 2000. Actually, I met Marco in 95. He came and we did some jams together. So I've known all these guys, and so it's like if somebody's coming or going, that's cool. I got my other buddy coming in, you know. It's just like a free flowing thing. And then when John, you know, we did a lot of work with John, and he just kind of got burned out. But the rest of us were like, yeah, it's great, you know, let's keep going. And he's like, I just want to take a chill for a minute. He had some solo stuff going on, and Marco had some touring going on, but we wanted to keep going. And that's the way the Daisies is. We had Dean and we brought in Glenn, and we asked Glenn, hey, do you want to, you know, work on a record together? And he's like, yeah. And so actually the way that went down was the management called him. I didn't even think about Glenn because he was doing his Deep Purple stuff. Deep Purple, Glenn Hughes plays Deep Purple tribute. And so I didn't even think of Glenn, but then the management had already talked to him and asked me, what do you think about Glenn Hughes? I'm like, are you kidding? That would be amazing, you know? So it's always been fun. I really enjoy working with David. David is a really, really down to earth guy. He's in, you know, he's the founder of the band, but he's also just the guitar player too, like me. Like we all have our thing that we do for the band, but David brings a youthful energy to the band, and you know, we're very fortunate with a lot of things with this situation. So I've had a great time.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm mistaken, but you haven't performed live since Radiance was released. Am I right?
No, we have. We released Radiance in, oh, wait a minute, maybe you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
September we released it. You're correct,
Yeah.
Igor. Igor for the win.
Yeah,
Goal!
but I was going to ask you because I saw some previous concerts, that your last concerts before releasing Radiance, and you guys were already playing some songs like Hypnotize Yourself, yes, Shine On, the title track. I wanted to know how has the audience reacted to these new songs?
Well, it started off with Radiance. That was the first single, and it was a little bit of a different type of song, you know, for us to do. And we put that out, and we started, the first time we played it, I think we were we were on tour with Judas Priest, supporting the Priest, and it went over amazing. It's songs like that that are very simple. It's easy to pick up on, you know, and the chorus is very simple and really melodic, kind of catchy. What Radiance is easy to think of, you know, so it went over great live. And then we did Shine On, we added that. I remember I think we were playing with Foreigner the first time we played Shine On, or maybe it was Priest. But again, it went over really great. It's a faster song, and the Priest fans especially like that kind of stuff. And little by little, we added, Hypnotize Yourself and Face Your Fear. And it's all good, I mean, the songs are simple, catchy, heavy at the same time.
Yeah. And since we're talking about concerts, I need to ask you about Brazil because you only came once, if I'm not mistaken, and that was 5 years ago. So
Yeah.
are there any plans to return?
Well, we would love to return. We need to work it out, with schedule and everybody, what's going on with everything around the world. But there's no place like Brazil. There's no place like South America, Central America. It's a special vibe and a special feeling. And I've been so excited to have been there a few times with Whitesnake and with the Dead Daisies. That was 2017, I guess. Yeah, man, we would love it. We've got a whole bunch of new songs to play for you guys, so let's make it happen.
Let's make it happen. Well, a quick question about another one of your projects, Revolution Saints. Recently, Digas or Novo, your former Daisies teammate, announced that you and Jack Blades would no longer be in the band. What led to that decision?
We got fired.
Oh, really?
No. I was gonna say, like, make something of like Dean. Well, Dean found out that we were kind of getting we were taking extra money out of the bank, so he fired us. No, it was totally amicable, all good. I love Dean and Joel and I are friends, and Jeff is one of the greatest dudes. Jeff Pilson is just awesome, and Jack is amazing. But I think Jack and I both felt like, okay, we did 3 albums. It's been really good, but it's not a band, and every time we put out an album, I'd feel a little bit guilty because people would be asking, when are you guys going to play? When are you guys going to play? And we couldn't do it. I mean, Dean was busy with Journey originally, and then Dean and I were in the Dead Daisies together, but Jack was busy with Night Ranger. It just never aligned. And so after Rise, the album Rise, I kind of said in some interviews, I think this is probably a good time to knock it on the head. I mean, I don't know if I feel great about doing stuff and not supporting it properly, because then because otherwise it's like, it's not as much of a band as it is a project. And so I felt it was a good time. And Jack separately, I didn't expect I expected Jack to be on the album. And I expected, I had heard that they were looking at a couple different guitar players, but I think Joel's great for that,
Absolutely. Well, I have 2 little questions about some of your past works in closing.
Yeah.
Here in Brazil, you are very remembered for being part of Whitesnake and for your work with Ronnie James Dio. The first question is about Whitesnake because next year it will be 20 years since the band came back with you in the lineup. Now the band is about to retire, but anyway, how do you feel about being part of the rebuilding of one of the greatest hard rock bands in history?
Oh man, it was an honor. I mean, it was so exciting to be a part of that band with Marco and Tommy and Reb and Timothy. David and I immediately hit it off. It was like I met him and we're just kindred souls. I've been a fan of his work before actually it had been popular in the U.S. He kind of started getting popular with Slide It In the U.S. But I had been working with a singer who was very much a David Coverdale fan and influenced by David, and he had the early Whitesnake stuff. So I really loved that early Whitesnake. And so when I joined the band, I think David appreciated that I was familiar with his past. And then so I was kind of filling in a little bit with with Dio at the same time around 2005, and I said, so I had been in Whitesnake for 3 years, and Ronnie said, "Man, I want you to come back." And I told David, I go, "Look, if I'm gonna stay with you, we got to make some new music. We can't just rely on the past, make new music to talk about new things and get people excited, because there's a whole group of people that hadn't actually heard or seen Whitesnake yet." And then when David put the band back together, then all these younger fans started to discover Whitesnake. So when we made the first 4 songs on the live album, and then Good to Be Bad, it just felt amazing to be creating music together, and we just got on a roll. I mean, we just started a couple songs and just kept going, you know, and before we knew it, we had Good to Be Bad.
Amazing. Well, and my last question is about working with Ronnie and Zio, because recently the release of Killing the Dragon completed 20 years. What memories do you have of this record, of working with Ronnie during this period?
Man, it was a blessing. I wouldn't be talking to you right now if it wasn't for Ronnie. Ronnie, I mean, I was, you know, some people knew about me from, you know, guitar players or whatever knew about me, and from some past works with different bands in certain areas. But Ronnie took me and put me out in the world, you know, and he made me a better musician, a better player. And it was just, I remember the first day of coming to the studio with Ronnie, and I brought my amp and a couple guitars. Like literally, this is how it went down, Igor. I had a meeting with him. He had asked me to join the band in 1990, and I didn't want to leave my band at that time. For 89. I really didn't want, I wanted to make it with my band, you know, and so I turned it down. And so 10 years later, or 11, whatever, he asked me again. We went to a pub, and he said, "I'd like you to plan a couple songs." And I was like, "I want to join the band." He goes, "Okay, start tomorrow." So literally, I'm getting in my car. I got my amp and my guitars. I go down to the studio, and the guys were there, and I'm going to my back of my car to grip my amp, and this big guy comes up. He goes, "Hey, don't touch that. You're the guitar player. You don't pick up amps anymore." And I'm like, "Okay." His name is Scott Turbo. He was Ronnie's big man, you know, the security, and he carried my amps and my guitars in. And it was like all of a sudden, it was like my hands were precious. You know, they didn't want me to do anything, and it was like being a part of a family. Right from that day, I joined a family, and it's very similar to the Daisies. You know, it's like we look out for each other. Whoever's with us, you know, we make sure everything's going well, and that's what it was like with Ronnie. And Ronnie, like I said, he pulled the best out of me. He pushed me to be better, and we had a lot of fun making that record. Ronnie would basically be sitting there, like he would have a book of crossword puzzles, and he'd be sitting there, like you'd just be seeing him like this. I'd be looking at the back of him, standing back here playing guitar. He'd be sitting here doing crossword puzzles, and I'd be playing guitar. And I'd go, "Ronnie, what do you think about that?" And he'd be like, "What?" Go, "Let me hear it." And you'd be like, "Yeah, it's great. I love it." Or he'd go, you know, if he had a suggestion with the rhythm stuff, he really was like, it was super easy with the solos. He would say, you know, I think one of the ones that he really loved a lot was Better in the Dark. And it was a really burning guitar solo. And I did something where I didn't know what to do. And I just kind of did this chromatic thing. And he was like, "Oh, how cool is that he's saying something nice about that and comparing it to Blackmore." So yeah, it was an honor and a privilege to work with Ronnie and become friends with him. And we went through ups and downs, because when I joined Whitesnake, he wanted me to do it for a couple of months because we were free, but then David wanted to keep going, and I did want to keep going. I did want to stay and write with Ronnie, but he said, no, you know, you got to. We've got. What happened was I was up at his house. We were writing, and he said, you know, I got some. We were writing, and it was all good. But he said, we got some dates in the summer with Iron Maiden, and I said, but I already committed to David in the summer for another tour, and he was pissed off. He was really upset with me, and basically kicked me out of the house. That was in 2004, and but then, as I said, we made peace, and he invited me to come back. And we made another live DVD together in 2005, and I think that's what really David didn't want me to go back. That's when we started writing. So I've been very lucky to work with guys like him and Glenn and David and John Corabi, all the rest. I mean, I've been very blessed.